Welcome back. This is Pacific Ventures presents PropertyScape. Find the keys to your home. This is Expert Speak, where we bring the sharpest minds in the real estate world to the forefront to answer all of your questions. As property prices spiral across the Emirates, is this the right time to buy or to rent? Tonight is the first part of the two-part feature on buy and rent. So whether you are a first-time buyer hoping to make your dream home a reality, or an investor looking for options in both capital gains and rental yield, we have a consolidated buyer's guide tailored just for your needs. This is Expert Speak, and today we are joined with the marketing head of PropertyFinder.ae, the largest online property portal in the UAE. This property ecosystem brings together the property buyers, sellers, and professionals in a convenient and interactive format. Mr. Bharat Kumar, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
We've been actually looking forward to having you on the show for quite some time now.
I've been looking forward to be here.
Thank you so much. So let's get straight down to it. There's been this trend of late in the UAE. The whole trend of buying property has become extremely popular. What do you have to say about that?
Yeah, that's certainly the case, particularly over the last 18 months. There are a number of factors for that. The UAE property market has fared very well, even compared to at a global level. There are other factors that they, find the UAE and Dubai very attractive. It's very close to home, the climate's great, it's a tax-free environment. They feel culturally at home as well because there's a large components of the community that are here. So I think, I think the market will continue to remain strong.
So it sounds like if you're looking to buy property, this is the place to be. And what sort of considerations should somebody take in mind while considering buying a property?
Okay, this depends on what category you fall into in terms of a buyer. For example, if you're an investor, you have different objectives and needs versus someone who actually wants to move in. So if you look at it from an investor point of view, there are different considerations that they need to take into account, mainly in terms of where the property capital gains are going to be, as well as the rental yield. Because if you're not actually going to live in the property, your reasons are different. So that's one aspect. In terms of an end user, you will have different criteria. For example, location, are the facilities good, amenities good? Maybe if you have children, are they close to school? Is the property close to home? How much does it cost to maintain, service charges and so on? Whereas an investor, these are different considerations. But both sets now have to look at it carefully because in most cases, buying a property is going to be the biggest single investment people make in their life. So there's a lot of careful steps that people should follow, whether you're an investor or an end user.
So let's outline the key steps for purchasing property, both for investors and end users.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so the key steps really are first, obviously, you need to identify which property you want. And bearing in mind, again, if you're an investor, you may have different goals because you might want it in a place where it's very attractive for renters and it generates the highest rental yield. Whereas an end user, as I said, location, as well as price and facilities come into play. So once you've identified a property, then you have to decide, is it a cash purchase you're going to make or do you need to finance it? If it's a cash purchase, the actual process is quite simple, or much simpler than if you're going to finance. You obviously make an offer to the seller. Once that offer has been accepted, you then have to go through the process of what's called a memorandum of understanding. You do that. Then you follow a process of obviously making sure the finance is available, paying the seller, and you have to then register that at the land department, where the title deed then transfers from the seller to the buyer. That process can be quite quick, could be in maybe 2 weeks if it's a cash purchase. If it's a financing option that you need to go after, then the process is more complex because you have to approach obviously a bank or a lender. They will have to assess your creditworthiness, how much money they're going to be able to lend you based on your current borrowings, income and so on. And again, that category is also split because you could be a salaried employee, you could be self-employed or a business owner. So the banks will treat you differently depending on which category you fall into. You have to supply, obviously, a set of documents, bank statements, normally 6 months, salary certificate, passport, visa copy, and then the lender will then assess your outgoings and income and then make an assessment of how much they're willing to lend. Okay, then the process goes forward to if you want to proceed with the lender, they will want to do an independent valuation of the property. How much is it worth? You will have to go apply for life insurance, because obviously in the case of something untoward happening, you have to make sure, or the lender has to be sure that that loan is going to get paid if you are unable to do it yourself. And then it goes into the paperwork stage, where an offer letter will come to the buyer, a letter has to go to the seller, a sales and purchase agreement is done, and then again at the end, all the parties, the buyer's bank, the buyer, the seller, and if the seller's bank is involved, have to all go to the land department to do the registration and transfer of deeds. This process could generally take, again, Dubai, on average about 2 months. In Abu Dhabi, it's probably closer to 1 month, because there is a slight difference in the process between the two Emirates.
It sounds quite intricate, but 2 months to your dream home is not too bad. So let's throw some light on any additional costs over and above the actual price of the property, all the way from the finalizing the property stage to actually completing and having it in hand.
Okay, I mean, obviously the obvious costs are the property costs themselves, so the total price of the property and the deposit, and most people of course know that. But there are other costs that sometimes people overlook. So for example, the land registry costs, which have increased from 2% recently to 4% upon the registration of the property and transfer of title deed for finished properties. If it's an off-plan property, you also have to pay a fee to the land department for what's called a coud, which is another 4%. So that's something to also be aware of. Then, of course, there are brokerage fees. So when the broker, normally 2%, sometimes it can be higher, 5%, depending on, again, the broker, the type of property. So you have to bear that in mind. Then there are other costs such as insurance, life insurance. If you are looking for mortgage or home finance, that's mandatory. Insurance for the property itself, maybe building, maybe contents you have to consider, relocation costs. Then also service and maintenance costs, which sometimes people come to after the fact. So they've really liked this property, they've agreed the price, they've completed the transaction, and suddenly they realize that the maintenance cost per square foot or the service cost per square foot for that property is much higher than they thought, or they didn't even think about it. So this is also a very important piece. And then there may be some professional fees that you have to also bear in mind, legal fees and so on. If you're taking legal advice or some other independent professional advice, that's also an important factor. Then obviously once you've actually got the property, maybe there's some interior design work, remodeling work, furniture. Again, these are things that people maybe don't consider until it's later in the day. But once that you add that plus to all the other charges, it becomes a sizable amount. So it's better to actually list these out or think about these at the beginning, so you are aware of what the outlay is going to be and what you need to commit to and what you have to be prepared for, rather than having a surprise at the end, because sometimes it does happen, and we'd like your viewers to avoid that.
It does sound like a very considerable amount of money, which is overlooked.
It's a decent amount.
So to summarize, what are those key points that a buyer needs to be aware of when purchasing a property?
Okay, the first step really is obviously identify your dream home, your dream property. So you can use a site like ours, which is propertyfinder.ae. Once you've identified that property, approach and engage with a RERA registered broker, which RERA licenses, so that that broker can then help you through the next stages of the process. If you're looking for finance, then obviously you have to go and identify the best source of finance, do all of the paperwork with the bank and so on, which requires some time and documentation. Independent valuation will have to be carried out on that property. Then you move to the MOU stage between the buyer and seller. And then there's some other documents required, for example, NOC from the seller's bank if he has finance, NOC from the developer to to say that they have no objection for that property to be sold. And then you process through the legal framework and payments and so on. So once those steps have been taken, the final step then is that all the buyer, the buyer's bank, the seller's bank if it's involved, will go to the land registry to do the registration of that transaction and transfer of the title deed. So these are the key steps that buyers need to be aware of. And just to kind of reiterate that the process, depending on if you're a cash purchaser or a purchaser with finance, can take anywhere between 2 weeks to potentially 2 months. So I think that's also something to be taken into account, because sometimes people think, okay, this will be done in 3-4 weeks. I just need A, B, C, D. Well, actually, it's not quite the case. So I think it's better to be prepared.
Such interesting information. We really honestly thank you from the entire team at PropertyScape. I hope that was just the information that you were looking for. We'll be back in the subsequent weeks with a guide on rental advice too. If you have any queries regarding buy, sell, invest, rent, or otherwise, do mail us at propertyscape@queenbeeproduction.com. Also, get social with us on our Facebook page. That's www.facebook.com/ColorsTVME. It's time to leave you with the promise of bringing more big-ticket deals, mega infrastructure projects, and seasoned industry experts on the show. Do write into us, because we are waiting to hear from all of you. And until we meet again next week at the same time on the same channel, from all of us here at Team PropertyScape, ciao.